Yeah, I couldn't make it today because I've been battling some COVID. I have to be honest, it's affected a little bit that retention and memory that you talk about, which is one of the symptoms. And I appreciate Paul's seed very much and the intro that whatever I share is what I've come to, and therefore take what you need and leave the rest. And that although I believe this very strongly, it's not always easy to embody it. And I will leave out a number of details because of the nature of time. So if during the Q&A or afterwards you want to get into more details, that's fine. The idea of this oneness of the collective first came to my mind with a quote that I read from Abraham Hicks, the progenitor of the law of attraction in the modern era, around 2005, 2006. I think Abraham put this out right during the Iraq War, and I saw it a few years later, and I'm going to read it. And I think it doesn't just apply to war, but applies to policy and what goes on in the culture as well. Your government is a byproduct of the vibration of the masses. A war is a byproduct of the vibration of the masses. In other words, this is not a war or policy your government has waged against your will. It is a war or policies that has grown vibrationally from the vibration of the masses. That's an incredibly powerful statement. And for many people, it's counterintuitive. What do you mean? I didn't support that. The vibration of the masses, what they mean by that is the composite of all the frequencies of everybody living in a collective, whether it be circle as a community, whether it be a nation, whether it be the world. Where is the center of gravity, where all of the vibrations coalesce into the most dominant theme, as there would be a dominant theme in a symphony. And so that led me starting to think that this is a very different way of thinking about leadership and the idea that they are responsible or they are manipulating us, et cetera, versus something else that might be happening. And then I started having a slew of mystical experiences, and I still have them, that began to reinforce this point of view. I am a medium, and one of the quirks of my mediumship is famous political figures and other kinds of figures throughout in recent history have come to me from time to time to give me information. The first time it ever started, there were 3 in a row over a period of about a month. Bob Hope, Ronald Reagan, John Paul II, the Pope. And the predominant theme was about releasing judgment. That was not Reagan's piece. But the most significant thing that happened to me happened when I rented the movie Frost Nixon. Frost Nixon is about a series of interviews that David Frost, kind of entertainment host, did when he secured the rights to have extended dialogues with Richard Nixon in the late 70s. And the movie talks about how it all came to be and how Frost nailed Nixon on Watergate. It was the only time that Nixon was ever cross-examined on Watergate by anybody. And Frost took him apart. And as I was watching this, I was never a fan of Richard Nixon, to say the least. Got really angry at Nixon. All of a sudden, this beam of energy of Nixon's came down to me. And Nixon said to me these exact words: "You must learn to have compassion, even for one such as I." Well, that startled me. It was very powerful. And then all of a sudden, I got angry at Ford because Ford pardoned Nixon. And I thought Ford had set the stage for a lack of accountability of leaders for their bad behavior. And I started getting angry at Ford, and all of a sudden, it went into trance. And Ford came to me, and he gave me an image. And the image was of an ocean where the wave crested. And Ford said, "You don't understand how things work. You want to blame me as the leader, but the leader is the tip of the crest of the wave, and all the energy of the wave of the collective is manifesting through the leader or leaders. When I pardoned Nixon, I did it because it's what the country could handle, what it could not handle, what it was ready to accept, what it was not ready to accept." And that really shifted me tremendously. When William F. Buckley died, William F. Buckley was one of the fathers of modern conservatism. He had a talk show called The Firing Line that our family used to watch all the time because my father was really addicted to watching Buckley argue with liberals. And he was an arch conservative. And when Buckley died, I really had no love of William F. Buckley. I'm lying in my bed in my apartment down in Warminster, and all of a sudden, as it's coming on NPR, and I'm having negative feelings toward Buckley, I go into trance. And Spirit says to me, and this is very similar to what Paul said, talking about synchronicities, that life is a river, like a symphony. And there are all these notes that must be played in the symphony that are directed by divine will. And there are souls that, for whatever reason, need to fill various notes. Buckley had to fill one of those notes for the contrast and for the development of humanity. It's not personal. You want to hold a person against him, but it wasn't. And so that was really powerful for me, these experiences. In this very room that we're looking at in Circle, on December 20th, 2012, the end of the Mayan calendar, we had a huge celebration. And Christy Mabo, one of the greatest spirit communicators in our community, someone asked her, what is the relationship between leaders and the collective? Christy pointed to that, it's the wall as you're looking into the room to the right. And she said, that wall is the leaders. Then she pointed to the other wall. She said, that is the collective. And she said, that wall, the leaders, mirrors that wall, which is the collective. So I was getting reinforcement of this point of view of leaders expressing the collective and mirroring back to the collective what the collective is thinking, or the mass vibration is doing at any one time. In conversations with God, God says, if a madman walks off a cliff and 80 million people to follow, is the madman to blame? And so I began to internalize this point of view. Now, clearly, the point comes up, and then I started asking myself, but wait a minute, we know there's manipulation. We know that there is scandal. We know that there are legitimate conspiracies, such as the oil companies knew about global warming, climate change in the 70s, but they hid the information and they use their influence to frame the debate so action on climate change and moving away from fossil fuels wouldn't happen. But we could give hundreds of examples of that. Where does that fit into this model? Isn't there manipulation going on? I'd say absolutely. But if we look deeper, first of all, I would ask, what I ask myself and I would ask is, where is there a law that says that leaders have to have a more advanced consciousness than the collective? Why would that be? What if leadership is at the same level as the collective, but for reasons that we'll get into very quickly, why are they the ones who ascended the place, but are they reflecting back? Now, I love George Carlin immensely. Before he got too nihilistic, there's a quote of his I loved, which kind of expresses this thought about the relationship between leaders and the collective. Now, there's one thing you might have noticed I don't complain about anymore, about politicians. And this could be religious leaders, business leaders, you name it. Everybody complains about politicians. Everybody says they suck. Well, where do people think these people come from? They don't fall out of the sky. They don't pass through a membrane from another dimension. They come from American parents, American families, American homes, American schools, American churches, American businesses, and American universities, and they're elected by American citizens. This is the best we can do, folks. This is what we have to offer. It's what our system produces. Negative stuff in, negative stuff out. If you have selfish, ignorant citizens, you're going to have selfish, ignorant leaders. Term limits aren't going to do any good. Just going to end up with a brand new brand of selfish, ignorant Americans. Well, if we take all reflections, it's not completely true, because there are many reflections of the collective. It's not just one particular piece. So there are good leaders and there are positive leaders within the collective, and there are negative leaders with the collective. But I began to ask myself, okay, well, what then causes us to have things that perhaps those of us who are more progressive don't want, or a lot of people don't want, left or right? There's a lot of contention about that. What is causing that? And I have to go to a deeper level that I came to myself, which is what produces the mass vibration. And it is the cultural ethos. Each country has a DNA imprint, as each individual has a DNA imprint. So if we look at America, in the early 90s, I had a session with Amy Bortner. And Amy was one of the first great psychic channels in our area who mentored a lot of people and really laid down the groundwork for channeling in this area and influenced so many people. I had many sessions with her. And one day, her guide said to me, one of the reasons souls incarnate in America is because it's a place to examine power. Power up, power down, power sideways, power from every angle. So sometimes what you think is wrong may be right within the cosmic scheme of things in what spirit is trying to investigate. It's not all fun and games. It encompasses everything, every note in the orchestra. Excuse me, I'm having a memory lapse. It's a COVID thing. Give me a second. So I thought that, okay, it's not just power. There are a lot of elements in America, but some of the more predominant ones are also abundance and wealth. There is so much wealth here, it's staggering, that we take for granted, even living a modest middle-class lifestyle. I read somewhere that in America, if the whole world lived at the level of wealth of America, of the average American, you would need 5.5 Earths of resources to support that level of how we live. Excuse me. And the other is that what's really, really important is individualism, or the notion of individual freedom. America is a place of the enormous exploration of the nature of individualism and individual freedom, probably more so than any society that's ever existed in human existence on a mass level. And although America has done wonderful things of exporting democracy and individual freedom to the rest of the world, there's a very deep shadow piece about the relationship between what is the rights and freedom within the collective and what is unrestrained individual freedom. I can do what I want, where I want, how I want, and I don't care what effect it has on others. I'm only concerned about what I get out of it. We look at some of the people in our society that maybe aren't the greatest, like Elon Musk, and he fits that mold. That there's unrestrained freedom, individualism can be really, really problematic. Also, Americans have a propensity of love of violence. The most predominant national sports event is a brutal militaristic collision sport. Only America could invent American football. Only America could produce John Wayne. And so on the shadow side of all this, when you mix all of these things together, you have a propensity for the possibility of sociopathic behavior. Now, all countries have this to some degree, but America has, I read a study once recently that said up to 20% of CEOs in America are sociopathic. And if you mix these things together, the propensity for sociopathic behavior from the collective and from leadership based on the ethos is incredibly probable. And that's something we've had to struggle with all throughout our history, with this clash between the wealth, the power, and individual freedom, and the unrestrained individualism. So as I thought about this, I said, as I went through, this took years, I said, what is the root cause of all this? There's something deeper. What creates the cultural ethos? And if we go back to what Amy said, the first thing is divine will. That on these macro levels of nations arising and things arising, that's God's decision. What do I want to explore? It comes out of a place that's not thinking of God. It arises as something to be inspected. There's so much fruitfulness in the American experiment for souls to learn. But there's also something, the mechanism by which it happens in human life is what's called the evolution of the soul journey, or soul ages. In Michael Newton's Journey of Souls, he was a hypnotherapist who did 2,000 hypnotherapist sessions with people exploring the afterlife, what it was like, and the relationship to reincarnation. And he said in his investigation, he found that there are beginning souls, intermediate souls, and advanced souls. And there were only about 15%, in his experience, advanced souls on the planet at the time he wrote the book. Brian Weiss famously did work in past lives, said Earth is a school, but it's a one-room schoolhouse where all different souls at various levels come together. So that's part of what makes it so difficult. And I came across these teachings, these channel teachings called the Michael teachings. And they laid it out in really specific ways of what's called soul ages. There are 5 stages in the human life that humans go through. There's infant souls, and their main mode is survival, just getting by. They transition to baby souls. These are fundamentalists, literalness, the rules, tribalism, right and wrong, black and white, law and order. Souls move into young soul stage. And the young souls are those, the great achievers. Rock and roll is quintessential young soul energy, but also it's all about me, not about my relationship to the collective. Souls then move into the mature soul stage. This is where me is replaced by we. And mature souls tend to think more, most of your social activists and your progressives and your people who've moved humanity forward in that respect are mature souls. And then you have your old souls. Old souls step back, see the bigger picture, live and let live. America has predominantly been a young soul country. And therefore, the predominant value throughout most of American life is it's all about me. What can I get out of all this? Now, in contrast, Circle is an old soul community. Hannelore was an old soul. And therefore, the energy of Circle is very much about seeing the larger picture. This talk is basically, to a great degree, an old soul picture, looking at the current state of affairs. So you'll notice at Circle, we have rarely had any fundamentalists be a part of our community because the vibrations don't match. This stage over here is way, way far away from, and actually the baby souls really don't like mature souls and old souls because the complexity really gets them riled up. So any person who's a fundamentalist is going to be 100 miles away from here because there's no compatibility of vibration. Sorry. So one of the reasons, from my point of view, is there's an argument about nature versus nurture. Nature is what you bring in, who you are. Nurture is your environment. Most of our stuff in the psychological realm go toward nurture. And so there's always a question as if we could just get enough educators to go and really educate people properly, things would be so different. And I say, not so fast. Souls, because of their vibrational state, tend to congregate. So most of the mature souls in the country are on the coast, and old souls are places like Sedona and in Doylestown, and in the heartland, and in the Mountain West and the South, you get a lot of baby souls and young souls. And so the idea that a mature soul is going to walk into a baby soul community and everybody's going to be receptive to that is probably not true. And we've seen it already. If we look at the news, there are countless mature souls and baby soul communities that want to bring mature soul values of diversity and generosity and tolerance. And the baby souls, and they run them out of town on a rail. So from my point of view, America being a young soul country, we have to look at leadership. Why would leadership be at a soul level greater than the collective? Why would not the collective produce leaders at the same level that they are? When I look at realistically some of the things that have happened in the world, we can see how the collective informs leadership. One of the biggest things is the recent election. The pundits, the media, and everybody else that everybody says manipulates everybody were serious that this was going to be a huge red wave, and the opposite happened. It stunned everybody. What was going on in the collective was one of the reasons I wanted to give the talk today was that I knew that the election was going to be a mirror, one way or another, of where the collective was at. And it surprised everybody. And one of the most interesting things about it is that there was a lot of mature soul energy that moved the elective coming from young people. The greatest voting bloc that increased in this election was young people from 18 to 39. They had one of the most greatest turnouts that they ever had. And they supported the Democrats by 28 points. That's 2-1, 64 to 26. The next greatest was people over 65 who supported the Republicans by 13 points. Young people made the difference in this election, and they entered into the collective energy we see in social movements. We see all over the world where the collective can impact leadership. So the Course in Miracles says that there are no order of miracles, that a small miracle is as great as a great miracle. For me, with this election in where we are at this particular moment, which is very different from where we were at a year ago or a year and a half ago, the collective has moved. And it's reflected in the leaders it is chosen, who is chosen to listen to. Excuse me. And so what I want to end, I want to make one or two very quick points in ending. One is that if we ask how we got here, in terms of this polarization that we have now, I believe that this is a very fair and just universe. Through karma and reincarnation, everything is in the place it needs to be. Karma is the consequence of actions. Dharma is your purpose. America has done wonderful things for the world, but we have a great shadow. Between 1946 and 1989, we participated in 72 regime changes, and we installed a lot of dictators who are terrible throughout the world. And the seminal event, the most symbolic event of that happened in 1963 when the CIA colluded with right-wing generals to overthrow the democratically elected government of Chile. I was going to ask, but I'm just going to give it to you. If we believe in synchronicity, I would like to ask, what was the date that happened? It happened on Tuesday, September 11th, 1973. The towers fell on Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. You can't write a synchronicity for the collective in the mass across the sky greater than that, but we're too dense often to see it. I'd like to end with this thought. What value has this given me? When I get to this place of understanding this, that there's nobody to blame, that this is all expression of who we are collectively, and I can really get there, the first thing it gives me is peace. Everything is, no matter how tumultuous and crazy it seems to be, or how we think this shouldn't be the way things are, everything is where it needs to be. There are reasons why it is where it is, and therefore I can be at peace about that. And secondly, if I feel peace, then that can move to forgiveness, because it's much easier to move to forgiveness when I'm not being triggered. Recently, I got angry at Clarence Thomas, and Thurgood Marshall came to me right away, and forgiveness swept through me. So we go back to the fact that everything is in its place, and everybody's playing the role they need to, and there's just nobody to blame. And I think that's what this has all taught me. So I'll open it up for any questions or comments that people want to give.